Hey everybody, before we start today's video, I just want to do a little quick update. You see, 4Films is now going to be switched to every other Monday because it takes a long time to get the videos out. And that's due to my terrible, terrible internet, which I'm sure I've talked about before. But it can even make a short video take a really long time. And as I'm sure you know, it takes a lot of time and work just to make one video when you're doing it all by yourself. So with that being said, let's focus on today's topic, which is zombies. I'm Zack Bishop, and welcome to 4Films. So in today's 4Films special, I'll be going over how zombie fiction influences zombie fiction. And just to be clear, I am referring to the standard or modern zombies, which were started by George Romero, so about 1968 till now. And of course, I haven't seen every single piece of zombie fiction ever, especially not over the past, 50-something years, so I am not claiming to be an expert on the subject. However, based on everything I have seen and read, I have come to the following conclusions. So in 1968, George A. Romero's film Night of the Living Dead establishes what a zombie is to the public, despite them being called ghouls. Whatever. This is then followed by the sequels Dawn and Day of the Dead in the 70s and 80s respectively. This was then followed by the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead. A little bit later on in the mid-90s, around 1996, the original Resident Evil trilogy started. And that lasted with Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 Nemesis from 1996, 1998, and 1999. Now clearly these three video games were heavily inspired by the Romero trilogy. I mean, you look at Resident Evil 1, instead of a house, you have a mansion. You look at Resident Evil 2, instead of a mall, you have a police station. In Resident Evil 3, you have the mercenaries, which are just like soldiers in Day of the Dead. Plus you see the wide city scope. And just to keep our timeline straight, keep that in mind, Resident Evil was inspired by the Romero trilogy. And in March of 2002, the very first Resident Evil film adaptation was released in the United States. While in November that same year in the United Kingdom, a film called 28 Days Later was released, later released in June 2003 in the United States. So we have one following another. Okay, here's why I said to keep that in mind. So the Resident Evil movie comes out, which is a movie based off the video game. The video game which was inspired by the George Romero films. Right. Then we have 28 Days Later, which was inspired by both Resident Evil, the video games, and the George Romero movies. Then in 2004 we have the remake of Dawn of the Dead, in which the zombies run fast, just like the infected. They're infected, they're not zombies. I'm sorry, but they're not zombies. They don't bite anyone. That isn't until the sequel, and I don't give a shit about that movie. And you can already see how these stories have inspired each other. Well, let's back up a little bit, back to 2003, because that's when The Walking Dead came out, a comic book written by Robert Kirkman, published by Image Comics. Originally, it was pitched as a continuation of George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Moving forward again, in 2006, there was a book called World War Z, which was written by Max Brooks, the son of famous funny man Mel Brooks. And both of these written properties were adapted into television and film. The Walking Dead, for some reason, is a show that's still on. A show that notably George A. Romero did not like. World War Z had a script that I read some of that got the film greenlit in the first place. Of course, once that script was greenlit, they tossed the script out and turned it into a shit-tier action film, complete with CGI zombies. Now, of course, this was probably done to mimic films like 28 Days Later, even though they're not zombies, and the remake of Dawn of the Dead, and even 2007's version of I Am Legend, which, those aren't zombies either, those are vampires. But needless to say, you can see how the cycle continues. So as you can probably tell from just this little bit of information alone, the 2000s were completely dominated by zombie fiction. But there is a positive side to all this, because not all of it was bad. And with that being said, some later zombie fiction from other countries turned out to be great. I'm referring to 2016's Train to Busan from Korea, and the 2019 show Kingdom, which is still ongoing, and there should be more episodes coming out in about a year and a half from now. Both Train to Busan and Kingdom have been well received by critics and fans alike. They're really good. I highly recommend you check them out. But aside from that, as you may notice, and with all that in mind, the oversaturation of zombie fiction has made it slow down to a crawl, or a shamble if you will, just wandering about, popping up here and there, truly undying, but very much on the quiet side. Now, I could have touched upon a lot more zombie fiction in video games and books and comics and movies, but then this video would be like the undead. truly endless. But the reason I made this video, the single thought that inspired me, was that how all this started on a quiet night in 1968 and slowly spread over time throughout the entire world into a full-on zombie plague. And though the plague has subsided and everything seems quiet once again, there's always that fear in the back of my mind that one day the dead will rise again. Oh my God. Zombies. Excuse me. Excuse me. No. No. I refuse. Get the fuck out of here. Jeez, the flesh eating, one thing. Sure, I understand. But the rudeness. They weren't invited? Assholes.